Okay, friends, Parshas Balak is all about Jewish strength. What Bilaam, Balak's hired hitman, had saw in the Jewish people. If it's ironic because if we can get ourselves to appreciate our value to the degree that Bilaam did, and without knowing it, we would be in a very good place, literally on every level. Let's take a step back. We have these two anti-Semites, real Jew haters. The truth is, they're for very different reasons. You have Balak, who's the king of Moab, and Balak is just afraid of the Jews. He doesn't want them passing through his land. He's afraid of what they might do. He saw already what happened to the Amalekites. He saw what happened already to the Midianites. He saw what happened to the Egyptians. And as a nation leader, he's afraid of them. So he hates them. He realizes that he's probably not going to succeed in fighting them independently, and he takes a very creative route. He hires a hitman, and this hitman happens to be a prophet. A non-Jewish prophet, a wicked prophet, but God had given him prophetic abilities, spiritual abilities, and this is Bilaam. And Bilaam hates the Jews just as much as, actually more. Balak's hatred was a product of internal fear. Bilaam wasn't afraid of them. He literally just hated them. He was like a real anti-Semite. And Bilaam says, I'm not able to curse them, to curse the Jewish people, which was his intended pathway toward annihilating them. Eventually, he gives it a shot. And what starts coming out of his mouth are blessings. And Balak says, no, what are you doing? The curses, or really the blessings that he had conveyed, are quite beautiful, are quite poetic. Some of them we're familiar with more because they made their way into davening, into the siddur. But I want to harp on the very first thing that Bilaam said. He says, I'm going to read it in Hebrew and I'll translate it. Let me get the exact verse here. This is, okay, I'm going to read the exact sentence and I'll translate it. He says, Kimiroish tsurim arenu. From the top of rocks, top of a mountain, I'll see them, umigvois ashurenu. From the mounds, I'll praise them. Hein am levada dishkoin. This is a nation that rests independently. Uvagoyim lo yischashav, and they're not going to be considered by other nations. No other nation can really think against them or plot against them. What does that mean? It's kind of poetic. So the way many commentaries understand this, just in the very simple way, is he's standing on top of a rock, standing on top of this mountain, overlooking the Jewish people, saying that this is an independent nation. Right? That makes sense. That's what the word said. From the top of the rock, I'll see them, or I do see them. From the mound, I praise them. That's just part of what he's doing. That's how many of the commentaries understand the simple meaning of the text. And I think that's quite logical. If you're reading the Torah text without any commentary, I think that's what we would think. However, that isn't Rashi's interpretation. Rashi takes a more midrashic interpretation over here, which is quite ironic, by the way, because Rashi is considered to be the literal explanation. He will occasionally or often quote midrash, but when he's quoting midrash, he believes that midrash is the literal interpretation. And what's Rashi's interpretation over here? And we'll compare and contrast, because there is I'll tell you this now, there's an age-old tradition. The Shalah HaKadosh quotes this. The Shalah is a Kabbalistic and mystical philosophical work called the Shnei Luchos Habris. The acronym of that, Shnei Luchot Habrit, is the Yishalah. Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, he was around the 15th century, and he has a lot of works on the Parsha and on the Torah, and he has this tradition that embedded within Rashi, which is the simple meaning of the text, is life lessons and messages, is almost like deep Kabbalistic meaning and explanation, as we'll soon get to. Here's what Rashi says. Rashi highlights the words Miresh Kimiresh Tsurim Ara'enu. I'm seeing them from the top. Before I tell you Rashi, actually, I'm sorry, I'm taking you for a little ride here. What is the significance? I meant to mention this earlier. What's the significance of Bilaam standing on top of the rock, watching us, praising us, according to these commentaries? Like, why does that matter? So the way the commentaries explain it is the reason why blessings came out of his mouth rather than curses, why he couldn't curse us, is because he saw us as an entire people. And were he to see just some of us, he'd have the ability to curse us. And this is alluded to in the following verses when Balak says afterward, Bilam, what are you doing? Why did you bless them? Come with me, let's go to a different spot. Hoping that it was due to the location that caused him to bless him. Well, what's unique about that location? It's on top of a rock. He could see everybody. There's everybody together. There's unity, or at least he's perceiving unity. That's good enough for him to not be able to cast curses and only cast blessings. But were he to see just some of us, he'd focus more on the details. And with details comes individuality. And with individuality comes separation. And with separation comes the opportunity for negativity to come and rest. Not that individuality is necessarily unwarranted or a bad thing, but the point is that's not what he saw. What he was doing was standing on top of the rock. He saw all of us. And for some reason, seeing all of us circumvented his ability to curse us and required him to bless us inadvertently. Okay, but that's not Rashi's interpretation. Let's go back to Rashi. I'm sorry for taking us for a little ride here. Okay, let's go back to Rashi. Rashi tells us that what is Miresh Tsurim Ara'enu? From the top of the mountain, I see them. It doesn't mean that Bilam is standing on a mountain looking at us, as the other commentaries had explained. It means that he's seeing us like a mountain or like a rock. He's seeing us for our strength. It's more of an allegory. It's more of a parable than it is a description of what historically happened. It's part of his actual praise. I'm seeing them like the beginning of a rock. I'm seeing them for strength. They're as, and I'll give you a loose translation over here. I paraphrase. I'm looking at their beginning, at their roots, and I see that they're strong. I see that they're fortified like rocks, like these mounds, because of the patriarchs and matriarchs. That's what Rashi says. So Bilam inadvertently blesses us, although he intended to curse us. His curse was, or blessing was, quote, from the Torah itself. From the beginning of a rock, I see them. From the mounds, I praise them. This is a nation that stands alone or independently. Rashi interprets them to mean, I'm seeing them as a rock. I'm seeing them as strong. And why are they strong? The reason why they're strong is because of their patriarchs. Rashi believes something very different than the other commentaries. Rashi believes that Bilam has the ability to see something within us that maybe we don't even know. Which is that not only are we an independent nation, and he perceived this by being on top of a rock viewing us, but we're an independent nation that has the strength of a rock. And the reason why we have the strength of a rock, where did we get that strength from? Well, where does that strength come from? It comes from our patriarchs. Now, this is a little bit different than learned strength. This is an inherited strength. Many people have learned strength. You could try this, by the way. Go to anybody you know. Identify a strength that they have that you're genuinely amazed by. Ask them where they learned that from. I mean, I do this all the time. And people say, I don't know. And you say, come on, tell me. I don't know. I was working with a client who was going through a difficult time and was hoping to show up in his relationship, in his marriage, with more generosity. And he told me about times where he was actually quite generous, even though he doesn't feel like a generous person. I said, where'd you learn that generosity from? I don't know. I said, think about it. I don't know. I just did it. And I said to him, if I were to not allow you to leave until I had an answer, if I were to be that insistent, what do you think you might come up with just so you could get me off your back? He thought about it. He said his father. And he started thinking about how generous his father was and how he grew up seeing that type of generosity. And that he even saw that and witnessed that level of generosity from his grandfather. And he got into the details. Now, generosity became something not only that he performed by accident, he realized it's a true resource that he has. But in this situation, it was learned. Maybe it was inherited too biologically or in his DNA or chemically or maybe even spiritually. There's no real way to know. But the Jewish belief is that Jews have a certain strength that we've not only learned from our history, Jews have had to have been strong throughout the ages, and it may have been something we've learned, but our true strength isn't only something we've learned, it's something we've inherited. It's something our patriarchs actually bequeathed to us. And the truth is, the type of strength that we have as Jews is the type of strength that you can't actually learn. It just is. It literally just is. There's an unexplainable strength that, for some reason, we're as stubborn as a rock. We're just strong people. And sometimes, by the way, that comes to bite us and where it counts, and it's inconvenient. Think of the sin of the golden calf. Moshe says to God afterward, forgive the Jewish people, because they're a stiff-necked nation, they're a stubborn nation, forgive them. And commentaries wonder, why forgive them because they're stubborn? Forgive them despite them being stubborn. What Moshe was saying is, they're stubborn people, and that could be a gift as well. Notice the gift within them. And we've inherited this stubbornness from our patriarchs, and starting from Abraham, Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu was very stubborn. It was very strong. He led an entire movement of monotheism, and it was not popular, and he suffered greatly for it. And God rewarded him for this. The reward, this is not just something you've achieved. This had become part of who you are. And because of that, it's going to be bequeathed to your descendants. We've inherited this strength. In Hasidic teachings, and particularly when you explore various books of Chassidus on this week's Parsha, they explain that the rock strength we're referring to over here is not intellectual strength, which is required, which is it's a good thing and necessary, but it's deeper than that. It's willpower. It's not just intellectual conviction. Let me put it that way. It's drive. It's a different type of conviction. The conviction you have because you want something is much more meaningful and strong, impactful, than the conviction you have for something you understand. Or let me put it this way. Conviction you have because of a belief is much stronger than conviction you have for your understanding or appreciation. So when people try to say Jews have a right to the land of Israel because of the Holocaust, and because we're a democratic country, and because we need a safe place and every nation has the right to a safe place, these are intellectual talking points. And when you have an intellectual talking point, you don't actually, it's ironic here, but you don't actually convince the other side. You temporarily suppress the other side. You temporarily quiet the other side until they just get louder and louder and louder and louder. And ultimately explodes and they take over the media. And now we have to rediscover what our true identity really is. Well, then what is my connection to the land? I'm using the land of Israel as an example, but it's true to our connection in Judaism, our connection in God, our connection to really anything spiritual. When our connection is because of a belief, not just because we're intellectually convinced, but it's much deeper. It's like a part of who I am. I'm a lot more passionate. The other opinions that seem to frustrate and trigger don't actually matter. That's the strength of a rock. Rock solid. You know what I think of? I think of Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our patriarch, who is running away from his parents' home because his brother Esav wants to kill him. He's going to go live with his uncle Lavan, and on his way to Lavan, he camps out in this spot, which happened to be Mount Moriah, Ara Maria. Happened to have been that exact spot where the Beis HaMikdash was. He goes to sleep. He has the dream with the angels. He's told by God that incredible things are going to happen, not to fear. But what does he do before going to sleep? The Torah says that he takes 12 stones and he puts it around his head to protect himself. And Rashi, as well as other commentaries, try to figure out how is that a protection? What about the rest of your body? How does putting stones around your head protect you? The animals could tear the rest of you apart. Okay, there's a whole discussion what that means literally and how that, on a literal level, like on a historical, factual level, how that's meaningful. But at least on a spiritual level, there's a lot of meaning here. If you want to protect yourself before going to Lavan, before going to somebody with negative viewpoints, before going to somebody who's corrupt, before being in an environment that is way outside of your spiritual comfort zone, you got to put stones around your head. You got to be rock solid. You got to be very strong. And here's the interesting thing. Yaakov was traveling with his staff, nothing else. It wasn't like he had caravans of horses and donkeys and like his grandfather or even his father Yitzchak had. Where did he get those stones from? Convenient. Here's 12 stones. Where did that come from? Did you ever think of that? Well, what happened at that exact spot one generation prior? The binding of Isaac was in that exact spot. And Avraham Avinu had built an altar to offer Isaac on this altar to God. It was those stones that were left behind. That's what the commentaries explain. Those stones were left behind, and he used those stones as a symbolism of him being rock solid in his commitment. Because where does the rock solid commitment and connection come from? From the patriarchs, from the previous generation. And the moment we realize that the strength we have is not our own, it's much greater. It's not just about my own intellectual conviction and understanding. It's much greater. That's the moment we discover joy and stability in our relationship with God, our relationship with Judaism, and the truth is our relationship in marriage, because this all ties back to marriage as well. When couples are just trying to understand each other, well, there's times you'll understand more, there's times you'll understand less. And by the way, I'm not anti-understanding each other. It's not a bad thing. But why get married? Why not just understand each other? Marriage means even when we don't understand each other, we're still rock solid connected. We're still committed. We're still surrounded by those stones together. We're still united. And that type of rock solid connection, rock solid commitment that we've inherited from our forefathers is exactly what Bilaam saw within us. Can you imagine looking at another Jew and seeing that rock solid connection the way Bilaam did? Yeah, but that guy, Bilaam was also thinking that too. Bilaam tried cursing the Jewish people. He had every excuse not to see that. He wasn't looking for it. He couldn't help but notice it. We have to be like Bilaam. There's times where people are frustrating, where people are difficult, where it's easy to give up hope on them, where it's easy not to believe in them. And there's good reason not to believe in them. Maybe their track record proves that. But like Bilaam, we can't help but notice, or not notice, the rock solid connection that exists within them. About 8 months ago, I was teaching a class at the labs in Livermore, and there was a fellow there. He's a scientist. He's one of the oldest employees in the labs. Beautiful neshama, beautiful soul. He's probably pushing 90. He's like a part-time employee. Drinking the words of Torah thirstily, which is fascinating because he calls himself an atheist. Right? We need more atheists like that in this world. He says to me after the class, "Can I ask you a question?" Sure. How is Judaism doing in America? What does that mean? He says, "I've been out of the loop." This is his, he's reconnecting with his Jewish roots from these classes for the first time in many, 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 many decades. His wife isn't Jewish. His kids aren't Jewish. His grandkids aren't Jewish. And he shared this with me. He says, because I've just been out of the loop. I've left Judaism. And I'm curious if more people are joining Judaism than are leaving, or more people leaving than are joining. Is this sustainable? I said to him, I don't have any data. I don't have any statistics to share with you. But what I could say is Judaism has been more accessible now than it ever has been. Probably in history. Maybe since Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, we all stood there, but even that wasn't sustainable. It didn't, the inspiration fled. But now, the ability to learn Torah, to connect to God, to understand our roots, to appreciate the rock-solid connection we have that Bilaam noticed within us, I mean, it wasn't a class on Bilam, so I didn't mention that part. But the ability to do this is more accessible now than it ever has been in history. Anybody could pull out their cell phone and in any language connect, study Torah. There's more opportunities on college campuses than there ever has been. There's more opportunities with Chabad centers and other centers as well, outreach centers as well, throughout the world than there ever has been. I said that's got to be emblematic of some sort of interest among the consumers. I thought it was a good answer, but he looks at me and goes, why? What do you mean why? Why what? Why would anybody want this? Which is ironic because he wanted it, right? Nobody's forcing him to show up. The food wasn't that great. It wasn't that... No, I'm kidding. But I'm saying he opted to be there. So I said to him, it's a good question. I don't know. In many cases, it's easier not to want it. If you're a Jewish student at Columbia University, a place where, and I'm using them as an example, but there's many universities to call out, a place where anti-Semitism and Jew hatred has become acceptable, a place where Jews are not protected and have to hide in classrooms and avoid people to get to their class, it's easier to hide the Star of David, to take off the yarmulke, and just say I'm just a regular student. It probably won't help anyways, because people, I don't know, the soul just shines too much. But theoretically, it would be easier to do that. So why are they embracing Judaism? Why? Back to the question, why? And what I said to him was, what you're describing with that why is what I call the soul. And what we're calling right now, the rock-solid connection that Bilam had saw within us. The rock-solid interest that Bilam had saw within us. And sometimes, in order to see this within other people, and by the way, to see this within ourselves, we have to, this is going to sound bad, but we can't believe people. You have to believe in people more than you believe people. People say all the time, well, I'm not too much into the Judaism thing. But then they're showing up. Which means you don't believe them, you believe in them. I was working with a person who was going through a difficult time in his marriage. And he told me he hasn't felt much connection in many, many decades, several decades in his relationship. And he felt like, he obviously felt there was something worth working on, right? Because he came to me for assistance. I asked him, how did you meet your wife? And he starts describing how they had first met, which is usually a positive question that kind of triggers memories. But he says, my wife claims she has never felt happy since we got married. And I'm just, I don't know what to say. I can't. But he says, I don't believe her. Which gave me opportunity to ask him why he doesn't believe her. This is the rock-solid connection. That what we say doesn't, and even what we do, and how we even feel and think, doesn't always reflect the deepest part of us. But when we discover the deepest part of us, and we see ourselves and others the way Bilam saw us, that's going to affect the way we think, the way we feel, and ultimately, the way we behave. I want to point out one last point. I think this is important to mention. Bilam is speaking in parables, in allegory. He's not saying we're literally a rock. There's literally a rock within inside of us, right? He's using a rock as an analogy for some sort of solid connection. And it's important to note that whenever, especially in the Torah, but in general, whenever an analogy is used, the analogy can never be 100% accurate, because if the analogy was 100% accurate, you wouldn't need the analogy. You could just talk about what we're talking about. So the fact that you have to bring an analogy means it's by definition inaccurate, right? So what is the analogy really depicting? So in the analogy, the rock connection, where does rock solid connection, where does rock solid strength come from? Through the independence and rigidity of the rock. The more independent, the more hard, the more defined and rigid that rock is, the more strong it's going to be. The lighter it is, the more dependent it might be on the earth, the more rounded it is and the less rigid it is, the more flexible it might be, the less strong it's going to be. And that's why it's not a perfect analogy, because when it comes to spiritual connection, it's actually the exact opposite. The more independent you feel, the more rigid you feel, the more defined you feel, that this is the way things need to be because this is the way I feel things, or I understand things need to be. The more parameters we put in our mind, the less connected we are. And the more flexible we are, the more light we are, the more we appreciate dependence on something bigger than ourselves. That's where real Jewish strength comes from. Real Jewish strength, and that's what bittul is. Bittul, okay, you guys, I assume you know what we're talking about when you say bittul, but whoever's watching on YouTube, I'll have to describe bittul at a different time. But bittul, which is often described as nullification, bittul means being part of something bigger. That's a strength. Because with that comes flexibility. The strongest people are the most flexible. Right? That's what resilience is. Resilience is flexibility, the ability to bounce back. It's the opposite of rigidity. Rigid. By the way, I got a whole half hour without messing up on any words. Rigidity. There we go. So our strength is like a rock in the sense that it's solid, that it's stable, that it's not going anywhere. But it's inherently quite different. It comes with inherent flexibility because we're not set in our mind that this is the way it needs to be. But it's going to be the way God wants to be, which is a deeper sense of faith than where our mind can take us. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.